Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 8th of February 2016, the podcast that always, no, never goes out in a blizzard. This is your host, Shane Killian, and joining me again is Daniel Wilcox. Daniel, welcome back to the show.
Hey, long time no see.
Yeah, it's been a while. What you been up to?
Not much. I just got done doing one of my other podcasts, the Minox Nest. It's kind of it's a Star Wars Expanded Universe podcast that I do with a few friends of mine.
Cool. Send me a link. I'll put it in the show notes.
All right.
So let's cohabate the news of the Bogus. So let's start off updating a couple of stories we've covered in the past, starting with the North Carolina business owner who had his hard-earned money seized by the IRS because he kept depositing amounts under $10,000, something that isn't against any law anywhere. Well, thanks to the Institute for Justice, Lyndon McClellan got his money back last June, but the government kept resisting its obligation under federal law to pay Lyndon's attorney's fees, costs, and interest, which totaled up to $20,000 and would have been more if the Institute for Justice hadn't taken his case on a pro bono basis. But the district court has now ruled that the government does have to reimburse him.
Well, that's good news.
Quote, "Certainly, the damage inflicted upon an innocent person or business is immense when, although it has done nothing wrong, its money and property are seized. Congress, acknowledging the harsh realities of civil forfeiture practice, sought to lessen the blow to innocent citizens who have had their property stripped from them by the government. This court will not discard lightly the right of a citizen to seek the relief Congress has afforded." An Institute for Justice attorney Robert Everett Johnson said, quote,
"Why does that name sound so familiar?"
We might have talked about him before. We've covered several IJ stories. So, anyway, quote, "Today's decision recognizes that Lyndon should not have to pay for the government's outrageous use of civil forfeiture laws against a totally innocent property owner. The government took Lyndon's property even though he did nothing wrong, forcing him into a prolonged and expensive legal nightmare. Now the government will have to comply with its obligation to make Lyndon at least partly whole." Okay, partly whole is a bit of an oxymoron, but never mind. And we also covered a similar case of Iowa restaurant owner Carol Hinders. The IJ will be making oral arguments on that case on February 9th. IJ attorney Wesley Hoddett said, quote, "The government cannot turn a citizen's life upside down and then walk away as if nothing happened. Now that Lyndon has been vindicated, we look forward to holding the government to account in Carol's case as well. Congrats to Lyndon and good luck to Carol." The other update is about the famous monkey selfie, which PETA tried to claim a copyright on, even though they had nothing to do with Naruto the macaque, and monkeys can claim copyright anyway.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah, so clearly the photo is in the public domain because copyright only applies to human authors, and it doesn't matter who was taking care of the monkey, and it doesn't matter whose camera it is. If you leave your camera sitting around and I take a picture of it, the picture's mine, not yours. But when it's a monkey, the author is a monkey, and copyright only applies to human authors, so... Judge William Orrick has come out with his written opinion on the case, saying there is no evidence that the Copyright Act applies to monkeys, and thus, case dismissed with leave to amend. And he said, quote, "Here, the Copyright Act does not plainly extend the concept of authorship or statutory standing to animals. To the contrary, there is no mention of animals anywhere in the Act. The Supreme Court and Ninth Circuit have repeatedly referred to persons or human beings when analyzing authorship under the Act. The Copyright Office agrees that works created by animals are not entitled to copyright protection. It directly addressed the issue of human authorship in the Compendium of U.S. Copyright Office Practices issued in December 2014, specifically, and we covered this, the Copyright Office will not register works produced by, quote, nature, animals, or plants, including, by specific example, quote, a photograph taken by a monkey." And we covered that before. They had explicitly said that monkey photos aren't counted.
So, wouldn't this just be PETA kind of exploiting the monkey by taking his hard-earned money, even if they were right?
And something about that surprises you?
No.
This is PETA we're talking about, remember?
Yeah.
So he concludes, quote, "Naruto is not an author within the meaning of the Copyright Act. Next, friends argue that this result is antithetical to the tremendous public interest in animal art. Perhaps, but that is an argument that should be made to Congress and the President, not to me. The issue for me is whether Next Friends have demonstrated that the Copyright Act confers standing upon Naruto in light of the plain language of the Copyright Act, past judicial interpretations of the Act's authorship requirement, and guidance from the Copyright Office. They have not. So that's 2 cases where the courts were actually sensible.
Yeah, the courts can be a bit hit or miss.
Yeah.
I remember that one month, it was like a month with, like, Supreme Court all over the place.
Oh, yeah, where they just had one bad decision after another.
Well, no, it was like bad decisions and good decisions just sprinkled everywhere.
Well, we did that Supreme Court special where I think it was mostly good decisions, but we were rating the individual judges on how many good decisions they did versus how many bad, and it was pretty much a wash.
Yeah.
Say, if you're tired of the promos in this podcast, well, the patrons got it early and with no ads or promos. Just go to patreon.bogosity.tv and donate at any level. Hackers, terrorists, the NSA. But I repeat myself. Your online security is under attack, and the weakest point is your password. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass plugs into your browser and allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords anywhere on the web, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers and all your computers, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, membership info, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications and even mobile devices, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now. So we've talked a lot about kooky conspiracy theories such as the moon landing hoax or anti-vaccination. The term conspiracy theory is not there to deny the conspiracies happen, they do, but a conspiracy theory is something that someone cooks up to explain a lack of evidence. There's no evidence because the conspirators covered it up. Evidence that goes against the conspiracy theorist is faked by the conspirators. So the most solid evidence is dismissed as a product of the conspiracy, while any tiny little anomaly they find is evidence big enough to blow the lid off of it. Well, one big problem is, since the theorist is going against reality, he has to keep making his conspiracy bigger and bigger to keep it going. NASA faked the moon landing. Well, where'd the video come from? Stanley Kubrick filmed it, and you have him and the cast and crew. Then you have all the independent organizations and companies NASA worked on with the moon landing. Then it goes up to the U.S. government, and everyone since then, since they're doing things like shining lasers off the reflectors they left up there. And you even have to bring in the Soviet government to explain why they didn't expose it when they were itching to discredit the U.S. government in any way, particularly in the space program. So, a conspiracy theory that would initially involve a handful of people grows into hundreds or thousands, or in the case of the moon landing hoax, tens of thousands.
And inevitably, the more complex the conspiracy theory becomes, the more holes that can be found.
And that's actually what was found in a study published in PLOS One by David Grimes on the viability of conspiratorial beliefs. He actually shows mathematically how impossible it is to keep anything more than a tiny conspiracy going, and it reaches impossible levels as the numbers grow. So in his abstract, he states, quote, "Historical examples of exposed conspiracies do exist, and it may be difficult for people to differentiate between reasonable and dubious assertions. In this work, we establish a simple mathematical model for conspiracies involving multiple actors with time, which yields failure probability for any given conspiracy. Parameters for the model are estimated from literature examples of known scandals, and the factors influencing conspiracy success and failure are explored. The model is also used to estimate the likelihood of claims from some commonly held conspiratorial beliefs. These are namely that the moon landings were faked, climate change is a hoax, vaccination is dangerous, and that a cure for cancer is being suppressed by vested interests. Simulations of these claims predict that intrinsic failure would be imminent, even with the most generous estimates for the secret-keeping ability of active participants." And he really does a real best-case scenario, but anything more than just a few hundred people is just going to become prone to failure, and that number drops and drops the more time goes on.
Mm-hmm. All it takes is one piece to fall out.
Yeah, and that piece could be a deliberate leaker like Edward Snowden, but it could just be someone making a mistake and accidentally letting the information out. And he's not including things that start from the outside, like investigative reporting or things like that. So he concludes, quote, even with parameter estimates favorable to conspiratorial leanings that the conspiracies analyzed tend rapidly toward collapse. Even if there was a concerted effort, the sheer number of people required for the sheer scale of hypothetical scientific deceptions would inextricably undermine these nascent conspiracies. For a conspiracy of even only a few thousand actors, intrinsic failure would arise within decades. For hundreds of thousands, such failure will be assured within less than half a decade. It's also important to note that this analysis deals solely with intrinsic failure or the odds of a conspiracy being exposed intentionally or accidentally by actors involved. Extrinsic analysis by non-participants would also increase the odds of detection, rendering such Byzantine cover-ups far more likely to fail. Moreover, the number of actors in this analysis, as outlined in Table 2, represent an incredibly conservative estimate. A more comprehensive quantification would undoubtedly drive failure rate up for all considered conspiracy narratives. And he concludes that even under ideal circumstances, it would only be possible to keep it below the detection threshold if the number of actors involved were less than 1,000. And again, that's just absolutely perfect. Everyone involved is a perfect conspirator and so on. So he says, quote, while conspiracies do undoubtedly happen, their continued secrecy is probably more due to keeping the number of agents low than having an intrinsically small per-agent per-time leak probability. Even if a small devious cohort of rogue scientists falsified data for climate change or attempted to cover up vaccine information, examination by other scientists would fatally undermine the nascent conspiracy. To circumvent this, the vast majority of scientists in a field would have to mutually conspire, a circumstance the model predicts is exceptionally unlikely to be viable.
Yeah, basically, the probability of the majority of the scientific community fabricating some claims extremely unlikely.
Yeah, and the whole scientific method is set up to prevent things like that. And there is so much incentive in science to make findings that go against what's been established that you wouldn't be able to stop them. And he also mentions, quote, a sizable contingent still hold conspiratorial conviction about a range of topics, including GMOs, water fluoridation, and AIDS denialism, to name but a few prominent examples. It is important to challenge such narratives, as not only are they detrimental to our health and well-being, current research suggests that exposure to conspiratorial beliefs can affect our perception of events to a greater degree than we are aware. Acceptance of such anti-science thinking seems to be correlated with lower resistance to pseudoscientific claims. Acceptance of cancer conspiracy claims can drive patients to neglect mainstream medicine in favor of dubious wares by alternative therapists. There is considerable evidence that alternative health practitioners such as homeopaths are far more likely to encourage rejection of vaccination despite their ostensible medical technique being utterly devoid of evidence and completely contradicted by the basic laws of physics. It is unclear whether this relationship is causal or merely correlative. But I think there's a good reason to think it's causal, because if you have something that you just have to believe and you have to cling on to, and you start coming up with things to kind of explain away contrary evidence like conspiracies, then before too long, you're going to have to deny the experimental method itself. And that's just going to open you up to believing all this other crap too.
Yeah, everybody has something.
So he concludes, quote, while challenging anti-science is important, it is important to note the limitations of this approach. Explaining misconceptions and analysis such as this one might be useful to a reasonable core, but this might not be the case if a person is sufficiently convinced of a narrative. Recent work has illustrated that conspiracy theories can spread rapidly online in polarized echo chambers, which may be deeply invested in a particular narrative and closed off to other sources of information. In a recent Californian study on parents, it was found that countering anti-vaccination misconceptions related to the autism was possible with clear explanation, but that for parents resolutely opposed to vaccination, attempts to use rational approach further entrench them into their ill-founded views. The grim reality is that there appears to be a cohort so ideologically invested in a belief that for whom no reasoning will shift, their convictions impervious to the intrusions of reality. In these cases, it is highly unlikely that a simple mathematical demonstration of the untenability of their belief will change their viewpoint. However, for the less invested, such an intervention might indeed prove useful. So at least for them, we have this to point to, and that's one thing I have to keep reminding people, that when you're arguing online with a true believer, you're not going to convince the true believer, but you're not doing it for that. You're doing it for the sake of the lurkers, the people who are reading but not participating, who are open to being convinced.
Let's just get started with the cover-up.
Hi, I'm Dave. You may recognize me from previous Bogosity episodes. I'm also part of a podcast, the Superplugs Brothers Podcast. Head on over to superplugsbros.com. You can check out the podcast for video games and pro wrestling. We also have news, reviews, and editorials and all kinds of stuff just to talk about video games and pro wrestling and everything else that comes in between. So if you're into that, why don't you come check us out?
Something else we've covered quite a bit is our government's resistance and even outright refusal to comply with Freedom of Information Act requests, something that's become much worse with the Obama administration, the most transparent administration in history.
Citation needed. Also, I seem to recall this one particularly egregious story about a document being released that was pretty much entirely redacted.
Yeah, we covered that. They basically handed in a lot of black pages. Well, now a U.S. District Court found that the FBI has systematically and unlawfully obscured and even refused FOIA requests, including, and this is pretty meta here, FOIA requests for information showing how they respond to FOIA requests.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so this is U.S. District Court Randolph D. Moss ruling in favor of Ryan Shapiro, a PhD student at MIT. He's someone who's been making numerous FOIA requests and just had them denied or ignored or whatever. So he sent a FOIA request to them saying, okay, how do you determine whether or not to respond to FOIA requests? And they refused to respond. So Moss found that the FBI's policy is, quote, fundamentally at odds with the statute. They kept saying things like records were unavailable, or that they didn't exist, or that they couldn't confirm or deny the existence of the record.
They couldn't confirm or deny
that the record even exists. Yeah.
But it's all for our protection, right?
Yeah. Someone's protection. But they were denied on the grounds that information about their reasons for denying requests were themselves secret. And so Moss wrote in his opinion, quote, as the plaintiffs correctly observed, dissatisfied FOIA requesters are often required to take the government at its word in FOIA litigation, where the government has access to the disputed records and knowledge of how a search and response was conducted. The FBI concedes that the vast majority of the records in question are not protected at all. It is only arguing that by withholding all search slips, even those not protected by FOIA, it can amass a haystack in which to hide the search slips that are protected. The FBI's exercise of its statutory authority to exclude documents from FOIA's reach is not the kind of technique or procedure to which the necessary exemption refers. And so Shapiro said, quote, the FBI does nearly everything within its power to avoid compliance with the Freedom of Information Act. This results in the outrageous state of affairs in which the leading federal law enforcement agency in the country is in routine and often flagrant violation of federal law.
No surprise there.
Yeah. We can't even read most of the FBI's argument to support this contention because the FBI submitted it in the form of an ex parte in-camera declaration. This is essentially a secret letter to the judge from the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. In other words, well, we'll just tell it to the judge, but you don't get to see it.
I suppose we've just got to take their word for it?
Yeah. And he also said, quote, While FOIA with some agencies can be akin to a protracted business meeting or an attempt to get telephone customer support from a telecom over a holiday weekend, FOIA with the FBI is a street fight. So time will tell what the ramifications of this is, but this is a big decision saying, hey, you don't get to do this.
Oh, hopefully.
We'll see what happens from here, I guess.
But it is funny that I made that cover-up joke earlier.
Now you can make Amazon purchases with Bitcoin by going to purse.bogosity.tv. That's P-U-R-S-E. Moreover, most purchases can be made at a discount. Save an average of 20% just by buying from Purse, or get even greater discounts by linking your Amazon wish list. Go to purse.bogosity.tv. Bogosity.tv is a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for sites to earn advertising fees by advertising and linking to Amazon.com. Just clear your cookies and go to amazon.bogosity.tv, or check the right-hand side of the podcast page for Amazon's best deals, including the deal of the day and limited-time lightning deals on all sorts of great products. So next time you buy online, go to amazon.bogosity.tv. And now it's time to disendow this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week it goes to Remso Martinez of the Libertarian Republic for being one of those people who insist that Ted Cruz is libertarian.
What?
Yeah.
Where does this insinuation come from?
We'll see what he says, but we're going to see this more and more, I think, now that Rand Paul's out of the race. We're going to see who are the real libertarians and who are just Republican shills who care nothing of libertarian principles and are just trying to ride on our coattails. So he says, quote, I am throwing my support behind Ted Cruz for president. Honestly, I wonder why so many libertarians haven't at this point in time. Cruz has, since his first day in the Senate, stood solid in his conservative principles.
What?
Yeah, make up your mind. Is it conservative principles or libertarian? Those are two different things. The reasons libertarians should support Cruz surpass the frivolous differences between libertarians and conservatives that many use against him.
Frivolous differences.
Frivolous differences. As opposed to fundamental philosophical principles.
If he's being this bad, I'm shuddering at who our idiot extraordinaire is going to be.
Yeah, so he mentions a couple of things that Cruz did, like supporting Rand Paul's filibuster and leading the fight to shut down the government over the debt ceiling, but he says, quote, then this is the classic excuse, we've heard this many times, the Libertarian Party will not be able to come together to have any meaningful effect in 2016.
Of course.
Well, maybe if the Libertarians would actually stop trying to brown nose with the Republicans and actually throw their support behind a real Libertarian.
Yeah.
So he actually quotes Joel Curtinitis from Liberty Conservatives magazine. Hey, Liberty Conservatives, another oxymoron. Quote, for anyone looking at the issues rather than the name placards, it's obvious that the Cruz-Paul tussle for the liberty movement has been a tremendous gift to the movement. Cruz does not call himself a libertarian, neither does Rand Paul, but this libertarian-ish streak has been obvious enough to draw the ire of foreign policy hawks and social conservative purists alike. Cruz is a foreign policy hawk.
Libertarian-ish?
Election after election, libertarians are told we must get on board with a candidate who represents virtually nothing we believe for the sake of beating someone who also represents even less of what we believe. A Cruz win gives us the ability to turn that argument around on many of our erstwhile antagonists. How? It's exactly what he said. A candidate who represents virtually nothing we believe.
There are no words.
Yeah. And especially since Curtinitis keeps talking about how we need him to defeat Donald Trump. So, lacking self-awareness much?
Lesser of two evils is still evil.
Yep. So going back to Martinez, he says that Cruz is, quote, a candidate within the Republican Party who can take the principles of the Constitution and free markets all the way to the White House. But he hasn't been going along with the principles of the Constitution and free markets. I mean, let's go over some of Cruz's issues and see how libertarian they are. Immigration, this is what Cruz has said, quote, "I will stop illegal immigration, build a wall that works, triple border security, and increase surveillance."
Yeah, that's about as libertarian as they come.
Yeah, that sounds more like Trump to me.
Yeah.
So on foreign policy, he says, quote, "I would restore leadership on the global stage rather than withdrawing from it, fiercely defend our allies and interests, judge each challenge through the simple test of what is best for America, because what is best for America is best for the world."
Yes, because militarism, American exceptionalism, and warmongering are extremely libertarian.
Yeah, and so is imposing your values on the rest of the world by force.
Hey.
Also, quote, "We should stand unshakably alongside the nation of Israel.
What?
I have pledged to rip to shreds this catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal." And he's also in favor of mandatory minimum sentences and expanding the war on drugs, as well as increasing Social Security benefits and raising the retirement age. And so Martinez concludes, quote, "If you want to reignite the promise of America, it's time for fierce libertarians and courageous conservatives to take this campaign all the way to the White House. Sorry, but if you're for anything less than stopping all war and ending the frauds the government is using to impoverish the American people, you just aren't a libertarian, and that's not even me being a purist. That's just the minimum."
Just definitions, people. Definitions.
Definitions matter.
I need a drink. I didn't even think we'd be dealing with something just that stupid.
So all of that makes Remso Martinez and any other so-called libertarian who continues to support the Republican Party this week's biggest Bogon emitter. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. And now it's time to go, what? At this week's And this week it goes to the government of Sydney, Australia, and particularly the New South Wales Liberal Party for a number of anti-freedom regulations that's causing the economy of Sydney to go down the tubes. Matt Berry on LinkedIn gives us the story. He says, quote, "Ruled by a succession of incompetent governments, everything in Sydney is now illegal, including fun."
That's hyperbole. Yes?
Well, it pretty much is because, he has pictures of signs saying that the last entry to pubs is at 1:30 a.m. and drinks after 3 a.m. is against the law.
What?
And there's all these draconian regulations that are causing bars, clubs, hotels, restaurants, and other venues to just close down permanently. But he gives lots of examples and lots of pictures. And he says, quote, "There is a certain time at night when we are all allowed to go out, and there is a certain time that we are allowed into an establishment, and a certain time that we are all supposed to be tucked into bed."
So the strict regimentation.
Pretty much, yeah.
Just about every minute of your life seems to be planned out in this scenario.
There is a certain time we are allowed to buy some drinks, and over the course of the night, the amount of drinks we're allowed to buy will change. The drinks we buy must be in a special cup made of a special material, and that special material will change over the course of the night at certain times. The cup has to be a certain size. It cannot be too big because someone might die. Over the course of the night, this special little person will tell you what you can and cannot put into your cup because someone might die.
Someone might die?
That's pretty much it. Apparently there were just like a couple of instances of, I'm not even sure what it was, if it was alcohol poisoning or whatever, but that led to all of this.
Are they gonna decide you can't go swimming because someone might drown?
Actually, he mentioned swimming pools a little lower in the article.
Huh.
Quote, "It is now illegal to buy a bottle of wine after 10 p.m. in the city of Sydney because not a single one of us is to be trusted with any level of personal responsibility. Likewise, it is now illegal to have a scotch on the rocks after midnight in the city of Sydney because someone might die. You can drink it if you put some Coca-Cola in it, but you can't drink it if the Coca-Cola has been mixed previously with it and it's been put in a can, because that is an alcopop, whatever the hell that means."
What?
The only person more confused than me is the bartender.
You did it! You did it, idiot extraordinary! You did it, Sydney! You completely blew the biggest Bogon emitter out of the water here.
And we're just getting started. So I mentioned earlier the 1:30 a.m. curfew, which basically kills businesses that operate at night. You can't enter into any establishment at 1:30. You can enter before then, but then you can't stay after 3 a.m.
So wait, you can be there at 1:30, but you can't enter at 1:30?
You can't enter after 1:30.
What's the logic behind that?
I don't even know. But of course, he also mentions how it's been devastating to small businesses, and of course, they're the ones that always pay a higher price for draconian regulations like this.
Yes, but it's for the protection of the people.
He says, quote, "Frankly, you should be both thankful and lucky the government lets you out after dark at all. There's a whole Orwellian nomenclature that has been made up to deliberately keep the general public in a constant state of confusion that some terror has swept across the city. King Hit, Coward Punch, Alcopop, alcohol-related violence. Being quite a respectable lot, we've all been guilt-shamed into thinking that something in the Australian psyche is ugly and that mixed with alcohol, we turn into raging brutes. Or that by simply having fun, somehow we've been breaking some great moral code, the 11th commandment, thou shalt not have fun."
This is exactly the scenario that Orwell set up. But this could never happen in an enlightened Western democracy.
Yeah, and he goes over the reports that they published, full of phony statistics and cherry-picked data, and basically how it fits the very definition of propaganda.
He who controls the past controls the present. He who controls the present controls the future. Or no, I got that wrong. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future.
Yep. He also points out, quote, "It is also now easier to get a beer in Pyongyang, North Korea than it is in Sydney."
Shouldn't that be telling them something?
And so he points out that most of these rules were implemented by the New South Wales Liberal Party, and he quotes from the party's website, quote, "We believe in individual freedom and free enterprise, and if you share this belief, then this is the party for you. We believe in the inalienable rights and freedoms of all people. We work towards a lean government that minimizes interference in our daily lives and maximizes individual and private sector initiative." And what they're doing is the exact opposite.
Freedom is slavery, war is peace, ignorance is strength.
Hey, it's not just the Democrats and Republicans that pull this.
Yeah.
So he talks about some of their policies, which include, quote, "Landlords can be commercially punished to the point of insolvency due to the actions of a tenant. Commercial businesses can be punished to the point of bankruptcy due to the actions of their customers. Where the New South Wales state Liberal government bankrupts businesses due to the actions of completely unrelated parties, people that have never been a customer or even walked onto the premises." And he links to all the stories covering this.
So basically, they've made things so broad that you can be punished for any reason. That was exactly what thought crime was.
Yeah, pretty much. And now whenever there is any sort of incident at all and the police are out there collecting information, here's the information they have to get. 1. Whether the person has consumed alcohol prior to the incident. 2. The person's level of intoxication based on an assessment of behavioral indicators of intoxication. 3. Where the person had last consumed alcohol. And 4. If the last place consumed was a licensed premises, the name and address of the premises. For instance, if a young lady drinks a few glasses of champagne in King's Cross, then catches a bus and is assaulted walking home through Bondi, then she reports the assault to Bondi police. The officer is compelled to record the incident as emanating from the last place that she consumed alcohol. The perpetrator is rarely caught, but if they are, it is usually sometime after the assault, so that perpetrator's sobriety is less likely to be noted. Even if the perpetrator was completely sober, it is still recorded as alcohol-related violence.
So it's the bar's fault.
Yeah.
That she was assaulted after... Not the person who assaulted her.
Right. It's blamed on the alcohol, even if she drank the alcohol at a completely different place and no one there had anything to do with it. It's social engineering. It's, alcohol is a sin, so we can't have you drinking alcohol.
What is evidence?
And he says, quote, these same police who are enforcing this ridiculous policy are also being discriminated by it at the same time. Police at the best of times have a tough and stressful job to do and are well underpaid. I am sure that many of them would like to have a drink to relax after the night shift, but now, like many other night shift workers, cannot because the venues lock their doors at 1:30 a.m.
At this point, they're going to have black market alcohol distribution, and we know how that works out.
If it's not happening already. I mean, speakeasies, basement bars, they'll keep their doors open after 1:30.
Yeah.
He also points out, quote, venues have been told by licensing police that LGBTI day clubs are now banned. I've been told off the record that any venue that allows a day club to operate has been instructed in no uncertain terms by licensing police that it runs the risk of its liquor license being revoked. We gotta crack down on the gays. I wonder if someone could do Pat Robertson with an Australian accent. We got to crack down on the days, mate.
Oh, God.
I don't know how that would...
The only thing you can do reliably, I'm sorry, is your Don Knotts.
I know. Doesn't stop me from trying.
Your Scottish and your Italian are awful. and the eyebrows.
Oh, come on. The eyebrows were great.
Yeah, they were great.
So he also points out, quote, they've now decided to go all out and are threatening to ban music festivals, even though festival goers in New South Wales are already being strip searched on a routine basis without any rules, transparency, or information provided about rights.
Dancing is a sin. It is immoral.
Yep, he even mentions Footloose a little lower down.
I was going to if he didn't.
You know Footloose was based on a true story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, here's the swimming pools. So you have the police taking the sniffer dogs around people at pools, and they're all in like bikinis and everything. It's like, where are they gonna hide drugs?
Well, obviously, they're hiding it in their rectal cavity.
Yeah. Dogs always sniff your butt. I mean, come on. So he says, quote, I saw on Facebook one poor fellow who tried to organize a few friends on New Year's Day for some good old Australian fun in the sun with some floaties at a Sydney beach. He was promptly harassed by police with potential legal action because, this is a quote inside the quote, you have not applied for an aquatic license to hold this event, and you have not outlined your water safety plan. If any person is killed or injured during this event, the organizers may be held responsible and can be subject to legal action.
So I'm going to have dinner and watch a movie with some friends. Do I need to get the Australian government's permission?
If someone has a car accident on the way over there, I guess you would be, I don't know.
Or do I not have a broadcasting license? Or a catering license?
And he said, quote, I looked up what would be required to organize getting some mates down the beach on a sunny day on some lilos. According to the application form, you would need an aquatic activity operational plan detailing safety procedures, rescue craft, qualified personnel in attendance, communications procedures, a risk register, and a risk management plan acceptable to roads and maritime. Evidence of community and stakeholder consultation appropriate to the type, scale, and location of the aquatic activity. This will be assessed by Roads and Maritime. Written authorization from other unspecified but relevant agencies or consent authorities, including but not limited to local councils and Marine Parks Authority. Written authorization from the occupier or trustee of any foreshore land intended to be used in connection with the proposed activity. And by the way, after you have done all this, please submit your application to us at least 6 weeks in advance.
I'm sorry, I haven't been too talkative, but some of this is just so...
It's hard to get your brain engaged after hearing stupidity of that level, isn't it?
Yes.
He also points out that in 2014, the New South Wales Liberal government amended the Liquor Act to deem a pizza bar as a high-risk venue.
They've got hot cheese!
A high-risk venue is any place that serves alcohol, is open past midnight at least once a week, and has a capacity of 120 people or more. What the risk is, I don't know, but it's a high risk of something, apparently.
We can't tell you for your own safety.
And he said, quote, "One venue operator who did not want to be named told me privately that after being burdened with meeting after meeting, being forced to hand over the names, addresses, and phone numbers of all his waitstaff, and repeated requests for receipts of all food and beverage transactions through the till, that he was threatened with arrest for not turning up to yet another voluntary meeting."
Are they redefining the word, or do they genuinely not know what it means?
I think they're just redefining everything.
Again, the very definition of newspeak. The very definition of doublethink. How can you, when you're starting to even approach and in some ways surpass North Korea?
So he says, quote, "What the NSW Liberal government doesn't get is that some of us actually meaningfully contribute to the GDP of the economy. We go to work. In fact, we work our asses off trying to pay the mortgage or the rent because the government is too incompetent to stop Sydney house prices being the second most expensive in the world, and Sydney the most expensive place in the world to live. And you see, not everyone knocks off work at 5 p.m. sharp in some 1950s daydream world and can make a quick trip to the pub if they want a drink before being home for dinner. Some of us work bloody hard and would appreciate a beer or scotch occasionally after work. I work in the cutthroat, highly competitive, globalized technology industry, and many of my team, like last night, routinely like to work until late at night." And he finishes off, quote, "No wonder everyone's apparently moving to Melbourne. Mike Baird has turned Sydney into Detroit."
I think that's insulting to Detroit.
I don't know, because I'm looking at these pictures and it looks a little better than Detroit. But then they haven't been at it as long. It's not as dilapidated. There's just like stuff closed down everywhere. And all these Orwellian signs put up about how it's closed down because it lost its license or whatever. Or sold in an auction, stuff like that.
This is a shout out to everyone who has ever said, "It can't happen here. It's so unrealistic."
And apparently it's just been in a few years, like less than a decade. He doesn't say exactly when it started, but it's just been fairly recent. That's how quickly it can turn around.
I can't even process.
So that just has to be more than enough to make Sydney, Australia, and the New South Wales Liberal Party this week's
Oops, past curfew.
Don't do that while I'm drinking. Well, that wraps up this. Boy, oh boy, are we gonna have big fun today. We're gonna have so much fun we'll forget about how miserable we are and how much life sucks and how we're all gonna grow old and die someday. edition of the Bogosity podcast. Come join the discussion at forum.bogosity.tv and feel free to join in by sending a question, statement, news article, or rant in text or as an audio file to podcast@bogosity.tv. This podcast depends on you to keep going, so please donate using the links on the website or the QR codes on the YouTube video. You can also become a patron at patreon.bogosity.tv and get the podcast and YouTube videos early and without ads or promos. Thank you for listening, and thanks again to Daniel Wilcox for joining me.
It was good to be back.
Until next time, here's a quote from H.L. Mencken. Puritanism is the haunting fear that someone, somewhere, may be happy. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.
Want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.
Wait, what's the theme this year?
I'm not gonna tell ya, I'm not gonna tell ya. We'll see who figures it out.
All right. Idiot Extraordinaire!
And now the story isn't loading. What happened to my story? Oh yeah, there it goes. Come on. You gotta love. See, this is why I don't do it live. All right, now.
Something.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I remember there were so many disasters when we did it live.